The Joe Rogan Experience.
Are you anticipating seeing like a lot of freaky things come out of China?
Yes.
Whoa. You said that very quick.
Yeah, no, it's true. I spend a lot of time in China. And this, it's a different. I mean, the thing with China has this great ancient civilization, but they destroyed their own civilization in the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. They burned their books. They smashed their own historic relics. And so it's a society in many ways that's starting from scratch. And so all of these norms that people inherit through their traditions, China in many ways doesn't have. And so it's a very different, and China is growing. I mean, they are increasingly powerful, and China is going to be a major force defining the world of the 21st century. That's why America has to get its act together.
That's a hard concept for us to grasp when we think about the fact that they had the Great Wall, they have so much ancient art and architecture. Yeah. We just assume they're a really old culture.
They are, but they wiped it out.
That's so crazy.
That's why if you want to see great Chinese art, you have to go to Taiwan, because when the Chinese nationalists left in 1949, when they lost, as they were losing the Civil War, they took the treasures and they put them in the National Museum of Taiwan. In the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, China, the Red Guards were just smashing all of their own stuff, their own ancient history. And now the Chinese Communist Party is saying, oh no, we're going back and we have this great 5,000-year-old culture. And in some ways it's true, but in some ways it's like an adolescent culture without these kinds of restrictions that other societies have.
That's such a unique perspective that I haven't heard before. And it makes so much sense in terms of like how frantic they are at restructuring their world.
Yeah. And they feel that they got screwed over because there is this vague sense of Chinese greatness. When you hear the word Middle Kingdom, it's like China's the center of the world and everybody else is some kind of tributary. And so they're monumentally pissed off that these colonial powers came and overpowered them, and they had to make all these concessions. They had to give land away, and hell-bent on regaining it.
They're playing the long game.
They are playing a long game, and we have to be, and we are not, and we have to be mindful of it.
That's also something you can do if you have complete control of your population. You don't have to worry about people's opinions, or you can just go in the direction that you feel is going to benefit the Chinese power, the power that be.
Well, this is a country run by engineers. We're a country run largely by lawyers and reality TV people, I guess.
Yeah.
But in China, it's run by engineers. So there are all these problems, and the answer is always engineering. So if you have a population problem, the answer is the one-child policy. Environmental problem, you have Three Gorges Dam. You don't have water in the north of China. You build this massive, biggest water project in the world from south to north. You want to win in the Olympics, you engineer your population, you take kids away from their families and put them in their Olympic sports school. So I write about this in Genesis Code. If you're China and you kind of have this Plato's Republic model of the world, and we're going to kind of identify the genetic, or maybe manipulate these genetic superstars to be our greatest scientists and mathematicians and business leaders and political leaders, like there's a model that you can imagine for how to do it.
Wow. It makes you really nervous.
It should. Yes. That's the thing. No, it's like, that's why, like, I just feel like with this country, we don't have time to have all these distractions. We're focusing on junk.
Like what?
It just like all of this, I'm on CNN all the time when I'm home in New York. And I always say, like, you guys, and I'm talking about kind of geopolitical issues, China and North Korea. What I always say is, like, you guys recognize this is porn. Like CNN and MSNBC, that's like one kind of porn. And Fox and whomever else, InfoWars, that's another kind of porn. But it's all porn. And we're drawing people's attention to these few stories. But there's these big stories that we have to focus on. And certainly the rise of China is such an essential story for the 21st century, because China is competing in all of these technologies. And China, it's like go, go, go. I mean, people in China who are involved in the tech world, when they go and visit Silicon Valley, uniformly they say, we cannot believe these people are so lazy. Like, why are they not working 24 hours a day? Why are they not issuing new products every week? And so this is, I mean, they are racing somewhere, and it's going to have huge implications for the world. And so if we believe in our values, as I believe we should, we have to fight for them. And the place that we have to fight for them first is here. And we can't, it's just like every day that we're just focusing on this this drama, this reality TV drama of our government is another day where we're not focusing on the big things. How are we going to get our act together? How are we going to lead the world in technology? I mean, if another example is immigration. Like we have this whole fight of how do we keep people out? What I'd like to do is to go to the State Department and say, all right, every embassy in the world, you have a new job. We're going to give you whatever number, 500 slots per year. You have to, in your country, find the 500 most brilliant, talented, creative, entrepreneurial people and say, we're giving you a green card. We're going to give you a little starter money. We want you to move to the United States and just start a life and have kids. And if we should be creaming the crop, skimming the cream of the rest of the world. Like we could take over, we could revitalize this country, but we're having this fight of how do we keep a small number of refugees out? And it's just, we're not focusing on the right things.
That's again, another very, very interesting perspective. We learned about Huawei in this country, really, not just, well, I learned about it because they put out some pretty innovative phones and some interesting technology. But we learned it because the State Department was telling people to stop using their phones.
Yep.
Do you think that is trying to stifle the competition, because the market share that they have, if they do really have the number 2 selling cell phones in the world now, that's not from America. America's largely out of that conversation.
Right.
And if they were in America, they would probably dominate in America as well.
Because they're cheaper.
Yeah, and they're really good.
Yeah.
I mean, their phones are insane. The cameras in their phones are off the charts.
Yep.
They put some video of the zoom capability of their newest phone, and people were calling bullshit. There's no way, that's not even possible. But it turned out it was true. Yeah. It really can zoom like a super expensive telephoto lens.
Sure. Yeah. So Huawei, it's a complicated story. For sure, the founder of Huawei is a former Chinese military officer. For sure. In the early stages of their company, they straight out stole lots of source code from companies like Cisco. For sure, we should be really worried if Huawei is the sole supplier of the infrastructure that supports 5G all around the world, because the Chinese government would have access to everything. And so that leads us to the question is, one, is there a problem with Huawei itself? But then two is, let's just say, so I think the answer to that first question is probably yes. But then the question two is, let's just say Huawei is a legit company and they're not totally intimately connected to the Chinese government. Can we trust their relationship with the Chinese government? And the Chinese government has a rule that every one of these companies has, the big Chinese national champion companies, they have a Communist Party cell inside of that company. And so I think that we can't think of big Chinese companies just like we think of companies here. We have to think of them as quasi-state actors. And that's why this fight that's happening right now is so important. And that's why, like, when China is out investing in different parts of the world, including Africa, their companies are kind of acting like arms of the government. I mean, they're making all kinds of investments that don't really make sense if you just see, well, this is a company doing something. If you say that this is a company with backing by the state that's fulfilling a function that supports the state, it's a very different model. So I am actually quite concerned about Huawei, and I'm not a fan of everything that this administration is doing. But I think on China, it's important that we need to stand up, and I think pushing back on Huawei is the right thing to do.
I'm uncomfortable about this for two reasons. One, I'm uncomfortable about the Chinese government being inexorably connected to this global superpower in technology, but I'm also uncomfortable that it sets a precedent for other nations to follow, because they're like, look, this is the only way to compete. Because what you were talking about, the investments that Huawei or that the Chinese government makes in these other these countries, and that don't seem to make sense if you're just dealing with a company. Right. But if you're dealing with someone who's trying to take over the world, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so when we have our companies that you're out in someplace in Africa and you're competing with a Chinese company to do something, build a port or whatever, and you're competing because you are an American company, and so you have your calculus, all right, this is the port, what's the income stream going to be about it? And you have a certain amount that you can bid, because otherwise it becomes a bad investment. But if the Chinese company is that, their calculus is not, is this a good or bad investment? It's what is the state interest in controlling or quasi-controlling this asset. And so that's why we can't project ourselves onto the Chinese. We can't say they're just like us, just different. We have different models, and our models are competing.
Do you think that we should avoid Huawei products like consumers should?
I think the government should very tightly regulate products like Huawei products.
Because some of their network, like routers,
exactly.
They've shown that they're using them to extract information.
And so we have a long history of European, Japanese, South Korean companies that have invested very well. They've outcompeted us, and we allowed the Japanese companies to outcompete our auto manufacturers, and that was fine in the sense in the 1970s our cars had become shit because we had this monopoly. And so I'm all for open competition. I'm all for free trade. It has to be fair. But I think that what China is doing, China recognized as a state that they could use the tools of capitalism to achieve state ends. And I think we need to be very cautious about that.
That's interesting that you compare it to the automotive market because the consequences are so much different, right?
So much different
But we do have a model to go on. We could see what happened. We made shitty cars. The Japanese took over.
Yeah. And then we made better cars. Like I have a rental car here in Los Angeles, and I went to the rental car place at LAX, and they had all of the different cars, and there was like a Nissan and a Toyota, and there was a Cadillac. And I thought, I said, I'm going to go with the Caddy. So it's a great car. And so I think
they're amazing.
They're incredible.
Yeah, American cars are very good now.
They're great.
Yeah.
And so I'm all for competition, but I just feel like what some Chinese companies are doing, it's not competition. They have become, not all of them, but quasi-state actors. And if that's what they're doing, I think we need to respond to them in that way.
Interesting. Many people have a concern that someone else is going to do what we're not willing to do first.
Yes.
Right? They're worried China and Russia. Yeah. Those are the big ones, China and Russia.
Especially China.
Yeah. They're very technologically advanced.
Yep.
And their innovations off the chain. When it comes to, like Huawei just recently surpassed Apple as the number 2 cell phone manufacturer in the world. 5 years ago, they had a single-digit share of the marketplace. Now they're number 2 on the planet Earth. I mean, they hustle. And if they just decide to make super people and they do it before we do, that's what people were worried about, right? They're worried about, there's trivial things or seemingly trivial like athletics. And then there's things that are really, like what's to stop people from just becoming the Hulk? What's to stop people from becoming immortal? What's to stop,
Well, 2 questions. First is China, because I think it's a really big issue. The story of the 21st century, one of the biggest stories of the 21st century will be how the U.S.-China rivalry plays out, and the playing field will be with these revolutionary technologies. And China has a national plan to lead the world in these technologies by 2050. They're putting huge resources. They have really smart people they are really focused on. And it's a big deal.
Yeah.
In genetic technologies, when last year my book Hacking Darwin was already in production in November when it was announced that these first genetically engineered babies had been born in China. And so I called the publisher and said, we need to pull this back out of production because I need to reference this. But it didn't require much of a change because I'd already written, this is happening. We're going to see the world's first gene-edited humans. It's going to happen first in China, and here's why. So I just had to add a few sentences saying, and it just happened in October of 2018. So China is on that path. And we need to recognize that on one hand, the United States needs to be competitive. On the other hand, we don't want a runaway arms race of the human race. And that's why we need to find this balance between national ambition and some kind of global rules. But that's really hard to do.
Yeah. And the other thing is that we're competing with them.
Yeah.
And so if they decide to do it first, we're almost compelled to do it second or compelled to try to keep up.
Yeah.
How far away do you think we are from physically manipulating living human beings versus fetuses versus something in the womb?
So physically manipulating living human beings, we're there.
There.
Yeah. So that's often it's called gene therapy. So, for example, there's a whole class of treatments for treating cancer called CAR T therapy. So you have a cancer. When you're younger, your body is better able to fight cancers. what you can do with someone with a cancer, you take their cells, you manipulate their cells to give them cancer-fighting superpowers, and you put them back into the person's body. And now the person's body behaves like you're a younger person. You have the ability to fight back. So gene therapies are already happening. A relatively small number of them have already been approved. But there is a list of thousands of them with regulators, in applications to regulators around the world. So the era of making genetic changes to living humans, that's already here.
Like, what can they do with it so far?
So far, most of it is focused on treating diseases. But a lot more is coming, because when people think about the genome, our genome isn't a disease genome. It's not a healthcare genome. It's a human genome. And so we are going to be able to do things that feel like crazy things, like changing people's eye color, changing people's skin color to funky things. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we're not doing now that we will be able to do.